Hello, romance lovers! Today I have a story for you called Radia. Don't forget to support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. Thank you for watching. The dark night enveloped everything around, but the bright moon cast its silvery light on the green crowns of the trees. They seemed alive under this soft glow, as if they were whispering their ancient secrets to the wind. Moonlight glided over the leaves, filling the forest with a mysterious and magical atmosphere. A barely perceptible aroma of night freshness hung in the air. The girl lay motionless on the cold floor, her hand powerlessly letting go of the sword that now lay next to her. A huge, scaly creature moved quietly next to her. Its massive body writhed, reflecting the shine of its scales in the semi-darkness. A dull rustling sound accompanied its every movement, which made her tense. The red-haired girl lay motionless on the soft green ground, her hair a bright flame against the grass. A huge, scaly creature crawled slowly next to her, its movements smooth and alert. Each of its scales glittered in the dim light, and a quiet rustling sound was heard with each touch of the ground. The girl slowly opened her blue eyes as if trying to wake up from a heavy sleep. Her gaze was at first absent-minded, but soon focused on the huge, scaly creature that crawled nearby. A mixture of fear and determination was reflected in her eyes, and the slight trembling of her eyelashes betrayed her tension. Radia Aster was a little scared, because when she woke up, she saw a huge creature in front of her. It was insanely long, its body writhing, covered in shiny scales like a living stream. The creature leaned closer, and a low voice filled with strange power said her name. It was truly amazing. In front of her was a huge snake, its scaly body writhing, taking up almost all the space around it. The creature slowly opened its massive mouth, revealing teeth as sharp as daggers. Its eyes were red, like glowing coals, and they stared straight into Radia Aster's soul, causing her to freeze with mixed feelings of fear. Radia, realizing the danger she was in, looked at the snake's huge body in horror. The creature's glowing red eyes bored into her, as if studying her fear. She felt her heart pounding in her chest. Her gaze darted to the sword lying on the ground nearby. Gathering her courage, she slowly reached for the weapon. Radia quickly stood up from the ground, clutching her sword in her hands. Her body tensed and her eyes blazed with rage. In the blink of an eye, she jumped, pointing the blade at the snake, determined to destroy it once and for all. The girl's face was distorted with anger, and her movement was swift as lightning, aiming to deliver the decisive blow. She froze, her body ready to spring, her heart beating in time with her anticipation. She carefully watched every movement of the snake. Her breathing became even. In the girl's eyes, there was not only rage, but also a desperate desire to destroy this creature. She knew that the moment was near, and in her hands, the sword was already ready to deliver the decisive blow as soon as the chance appeared. The snake continued to slowly open its mouth, revealing huge, sharp fangs ready to rip apart anything in its path. Its long tongue twitched as if trying to smell, and from its forked ends, beads of saliva flew out, glittering in the dim light, a precursor to its venom. Everything about its movements was sinister. The girl was about to jump, her muscles tensed, and the sword in her hands was squeezed tighter. But doubts flashed through her mind. If she attacked right now without having time to strengthen her position, she would not last long. The snake was too big and strong, and its poisonous fangs could crush her in seconds. These thoughts slowed her movement. Radia was already in the air, aiming for the snake, but there was a worry in her mind. She knew she was losing her divine power quickly and would bleed too much if she was hurt. Every movement she made was a struggle, but in that moment, her determination was stronger than her fear. She jumped, knowing that this could be her last chance. The girl had already jumped, her sword pointed straight at the snake's eye. There was only one goal in her mind, to end this here and now. She knew there was no time, and every moment could be decisive. The sword flashed in the air, ready to strike, and she felt her strength draining, but she could not stop. Radia was ready for anything, namely, for battle, and so, Radia plunged her sword into the snake's eye. The huge creature made a piercing sound. Its body jerked and spurted from the wound. The snake tried to move away, writhing in agony, but the blow was decisive. Blood and poison mixed, sparks of pain burst from the creature's eyes, and its movements became more and more chaotic and weaker. The girl remained in the air, clutching the sword with one hand while the snake writhed in pain. The creature's huge body shook, its movements becoming more and more chaotic and powerless. Radia felt her strength draining, but she did not let go of the sword. Her gaze was focused, ready to finish the fight, knowing that this was the decisive moment. She grabbed the snake's scaly body with her fingers, feeling its surface slide under her hands, and scratched it with her nails, leaving small marks on the tough skin. The snake jerked in pain, but continued to wriggle, trying to throw her off. Radia felt her strength fading, but she did not give up, despite the pain and fatigue. Radia, grabbing the end of the sword that was deep in the snake's head, felt its weight giving her the last of her strength. The snake looked at the sword with incomprehension and pain, its eyes reflecting horror and despair. It writhed, trying to break free, but the strength that supported it was quickly fading. The girl knew that she had to finish the job. She pressed her body against the snake, feeling its trembling skin under her hands, and gripped the sword tightly with both hands. With each movement she made, the creature writhed more and more, but she had no intention of stopping. All her strength was focused on delivering the final blow. Radia felt her strength fading, but despite her fatigue, she continued. She drew the sword from the snake's eye to the body, leaving a small but painful wound. The snake, crushed by pain, screamed and began to wriggle, its movements becoming more and more chaotic and powerless. The pain that pierced its body was unbearable, and with each passing moment, its strength faded. Nasty sounds were heard, and so, the girl prepared to draw her sword, feeling how its blade was firmly held in the body of the snake. She tried with all her might to reach the hilt. Her fingers trembled from fatigue and pain, but her determination did not leave her. With each passing moment, her strength was fading, but she knew that if she did not draw the weapon, she would not be able to finish the fight. But the snake, despite its weakness, managed to push the girl off itself at the last moment. Radia felt her body flying through the air, and the ground was rapidly approaching. Her eyes reflected anxiety and disappointment. She did not have time to finish the fight. Everything around her slowed down, and she realized that her chance could be lost. There was sadness in her eyes, the knowledge that everything she had worked for could be destroyed. She couldn't die like this. Without completing her mission, without defeating the enemy, without protecting herself and her world. Pain and fatigue squeezed her body, but a fire burned in her soul, a desire to fight to the end. She couldn't allow herself to give up. Thoughts, fear, and despair flashed through her mind, but the snake stood before her again. Its eyes were blazing with rage, and they looked at Radia with complete hatred. The snake hissed, its body writhing, ready for the final attack. She felt her strength fading, but her determination did not leave her. She knew that she had to find a way to win. She had already fallen to the ground, and pain had engulfed her body, but her eyes were burning with determination. Even though her strength was waning and death might be near, she was sure of one thing. Even if her end was near, she was not going to die here as the snake wanted. Her soul was burning with rage, and a single thought pierced her thoughts. She would not give up without a fight, but suddenly, a glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. Amidst the despair and pain, she realized that there was still a chance. A thought flashed through her mind. She needed to use the last of her strength to trick the snake. She knew her chances were slim, but if she could find a weakness, she could win. This idea gave her strength, despite her fatigue and heaviness. She was going to get out alive, no matter what. She glared at the beast, feeling all her energy concentrated in one moment. As if forgetting about the pain, she directed her hands at the snake's body, trying to focus her remaining strength. There was a fire of determination in her eyes, and she was ready for the last effort to win. Her hands began to glow, and magic began to form within them, like a flash of light in the darkness. Energy built up, pulsing through her fingers, and Radia felt the power grow with each passing moment. She concentrated, channeling all her desire and fury into destroying this monster. There was no doubt in her mind. She had to win. Radia fell to the ground from the strain, her body unable to withstand the weight of the magic she was trying to control. But even in this state, her hands continued to emit a powerful light. A huge beam of magic burst from her palms, which quickly rushed straight at the snake. The girl hoped that she could defeat it in this way, but the magic could not achieve a final victory. The snake, despite the powerful blow, fought back, its body twisting sharply, trying to evade the magic. Radia fell to the ground in pain, her body hitting the ground on the other side, and a feeling of exhaustion overcame her. She could barely breathe, but her determination did not fade. She stood up, despite the intense pain that shot through her body with every movement. Every attempt to breathe seemed painful, and she needed to catch her breath to regain some strength. Thoughts swarmed in her head about how to find a new way to win, but time was running out. The snake was still nearby, and its aggression was only growing. As it turned out, a man had been watching Radia all this time. He stood in the shadows, not interfering in the fight, but carefully watching her every move. When the snake prepared to attack again, and the girl had almost lost her strength, the man could not hide his admiration. His voice cut through the silence, and the girl, turning around with difficulty, heard his words. The girl was surprised to hear the voice and looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. She couldn't believe that a person had been watching her struggle this whole time. His presence was unexpected, especially in such a tense situation. Misunderstanding flashed in her eyes, and for a moment the pain retreated, giving way to curiosity. The man sitting in the tree watched her quietly, claiming that although she was still young, her skills were impressive. He was sure that she would grow into a fantastic priestess if she continued on this path. Radia was surprised by his words, feeling that he saw her future with amazing clarity. She was also insanely curious about how he came to be here. The girl's eyes glittered with the moonlight, reflecting its light until she couldn't tear her gaze away from the man. His presence was incredibly mesmerizing, and she couldn't put into words how handsome he seemed. Everything about his appearance, from the confidence in his movements to the mysterious aura that surrounded him, attracted her attention. As the girl sat there, absorbed in her gaze at the man, the snake behind her rose again, its body writhing, and a terrible hiss cut through the silence of the night. The huge, scaly eyes glittered, full of anger, and the snake prepared for a new attack, threatening with danger. Radia felt threatened, but her attention was still on the boy. The girl thought hard, trying to find a way to deal with the situation. Her mind was frantically searching for a way out, but there was no more time to admire the handsome stranger. The snake was preparing to attack, and Radia knew that the slightest delay could cost her her life. She concentrated, clenching her fists. She looked around in panic, feeling the snake getting closer and closer, and fear began to overwhelm her. In desperation, she screamed at the man, begging for help. She knew she couldn't cope alone anymore. Her strength was running out. Her voice, full of anxiety and hope, carried in the silence of the night, and her gaze clung to his figure. The boy looked at the girl in surprise and a little alarm, as if he hadn't expected to hear her scream. He frowned. His voice was quiet, but with obvious bewilderment when he asked if she could see him. His words sounded as if he didn't believe that anyone could notice his presence, and it clearly threw him off balance. The serpent drew ever closer, its massive body writhing and its menacing hiss growing louder. Radia felt her heart pounding in her chest. Her thoughts were in turmoil. She didn't know what to do, and fear paralyzed her movements. Was it all over? Was this monster going to win? Her gaze darted. The boy watched the scene tensely, his gaze closely following every movement of the snake and the girl. He was clearly considering his actions, as if deciding whether to intervene in the fight or let her handle the situation herself. His face remained calm, but his eyes showed internal doubts and tension. The boy suddenly jumped up and rushed towards the girl, standing in front of her like a shield. His movements were fast and confident, and bright magic instantly shone in his palms. He raised his hands, directing a stream of energy straight at the snake. The rays of light emanating from his hands were blindingly powerful, and it seemed that they were capable of stopping any evil. Blinding beams resembling flames erupted from his hand and enveloped the snake like a searing web of fire. Radia was kneeling next to him. It seemed as if the man's magic was endless, and its power completely engulfed the creature. The beams continued to burn, creating a fiery cocoon around the snake, leaving it no chance to escape. Her eyes were filled with surprise and admiration. The boy in front of her was using magic with such force that the snake was actually suffering, writhing in an unsuccessful attempt to free itself. His confidence and skill were impressive. She couldn't look away, feeling her heart skip a beat at the realization that he was so powerful. The man, not even looking tired, calmly said that her behavior was rude because she did not bother to answer his question. His voice sounded cold. Radia, still sitting on the ground, looked at him dumbfounded, unable to utter a word. She turned her gaze to the snake, and it did not fit in her head. Did he really destroy this creature with a blow? The man sat down next to the girl, his calmness contrasting with the tense atmosphere that had just reigned around him. His white hair fluttered softly in the wind, creating an almost mystical feeling. Radia, having recovered from the shock a little, looked at him with gratitude and quietly thanked him. Her voice was a little trembling but sincere. The girl was wounded in the abdomen and blood was slowly trickling down her sides. Despite the magic and the man's help, the pain was still noticeable. She felt her strength leaving her, but she tried not to show her weakness. Radia straightened up with an effort, feeling her body trembling and trying to concentrate on not losing consciousness. The boy noticed her wound and pointed at it with slight concern. "You're hurt," he said, his voice becoming more serious. The girl looked down at herself, realizing that her skirt was torn and that blood was still oozing from the wound on her stomach. He looked a little worried. He looked at her, wondering what he should do and how to help heal her pain. Confusion was visible in his eyes. They did not radiate joy, but rather anxiety and worry. The man clearly did not expect such an outcome and was confused, not knowing how to properly help her. His gaze darted around as if he was trying to find a solution. The guy, noticing her movement, immediately asked her not to move. His voice was insistent. The girl did not quite understand why he was asking so persistently, but soon she realized that he was going to do something. A soft green light began to emanate from his hand, filling the air around them. This glow was calming and mysterious. He began to say that people nowadays had become so cruel, and that it seemed like she had been attacked by surprise, and then it seemed like she had been teleported by force. The girl nodded slightly, confirming his words, but the boy, still looking at her, added regretfully, "That must have hurt." His tone was full of compassion. The girl looked at herself in surprise, not believing her eyes. She felt her body being freed from pain, and her dress became whole, as if the damage had disappeared without a trace. She could not understand how this was possible. Her gaze fell on the man again, and the question in her eyes became obvious. Who is he? And how could he do such a thing? She looked into his eyes, feeling a mixture of surprise and bewilderment, and unable to contain her curiosity, she asked cautiously, "Aren't you a priest by any chance?" Her voice was quiet but insistent, and in her eyes a mixture of bewilderment and hope for an answer could be read. She sincerely tried to understand who he was, and what kind of magic had so easily healed her wound and restored her dress. The man reached out to the girl, gently taking her chin in his hand so she could look him in the eyes. His gaze was calm and confident, and his voice was soft as he said, "I'm just an ordinary person." His words were sincere, but there was some deeper meaning hidden within them, as if he knew more than he was letting on at first glance. He tilted his head slightly and, still holding her chin, said, "Now it's your turn to answer my questions." His voice became stern, and his gaze, although calm, hid a certain insistence. She looked at him anxiously, her heart beating faster, and thoughts rushed through her head. Why should she answer now? He approached the girl, his eyes carefully studying her reaction. "What is your name?" he asked calmly, but then added, "And how are you going to pay me for saving your life?" His tone was casual, but there was a slight irony in it, as if he was not entirely serious about the answer to this question, but still wanted to hear what she had to say. And last but not least, would she stay with him forever? He looked at her with a mysterious expression on his face, a glint of delight in his eyes, as if this question was not just a question of interest, but something important to him. Radia felt her heart begin to beat faster, and her thoughts became confused. What did he mean? The girl flinched slightly at his touch and, feeling confused, asked him to remove his hands. Before he could answer, she took his hand herself, gently moving it away from her chin. There was desperation in her eyes, but also determination. She felt that she had to be ready to answer his questions. The man looked at her with alarm and confusion, and a thought flashed through his mind. Did I upset her? He could not understand what exactly caused such a reaction, and his inner doubts began to weigh on him. Outwardly, he remained calm, but inside his emotions were in a restless confusion. The girl began to answer, and her voice sounded confident despite everything that had happened. I am Lady Radia Astor, and I am the future heir of the house, she said, proudly pronouncing her name. The guy listened to her, and the thought flashed through his mind that her name actually sounded very cute. He looked at her, fascinated. She continued, and there was some determination in her voice. She offered him 20,000 gold coins for saving him as if it was a natural decision. The boy listened to her, and surprise flashed in his eyes for a moment. He hadn't expected such straightforwardness, but he felt that her words were sincere. She added that she didn't have any money on her at the moment and wondered if she might need to go to the nearest store to get some. There was a slight hesitation in her words, but she didn't seem confused. She was simply looking for a way to fulfill her promise, even if it took a little effort. The man thought about it, smiling to himself. Curiosity flashed in his eyes, and he couldn't help but notice how she looked at that moment, like a scared cat. He was fascinated by her determination, but at the same time he felt how her confusion made her look especially vulnerable and cute. He smiled and suggested that they go together in that case, adding that his name was Julius. His tone was light, and in that expression she felt something more than just goodwill. He was not just a man helping out of politeness. His offer sounded sincere. The man added that the castle gates would be closing very soon today, and smiled, saying that it looked like she would be better off sleeping outside. His words were light, but there was a hint of irony in them, as if he himself did not fully believe what was happening. Radia felt the tension return. Her situation had become even more difficult than she had thought. The girl did not quite understand his proposal, and not hiding her anger, looked at him. She frowned and asked again, not believing her ears, while he continued to stand with a smile on his face. His calmness only increased her displeasure, but she could not help but notice that there was something secretive and incomprehensible in his eyes. He chuckled and said he was just joking, adding that he knew an inn near the castle. If she wanted, he would take her there. The girl, having calmed down a bit, nodded in agreement. There was still some wariness in her gaze, but she understood that in this situation she could trust him, at least for a while. As they walked into the hotel, he continued to ask his third question, asking what the answer was. He added that if she stayed with him, she would no longer be attacked by surprise, and didn't that sound wonderful? But the girl, frowning slightly, refused. She knew he was trying to trap her with words. The girl read the paper with irritation, her eyes quickly running over the lines, and the guy stood behind her and quietly listened. She was surprised because she was sent 20,000 kilometers away, and this was unexpected and unfair for her. She could not understand why she was sent so far, and what was really behind this assignment. The girl crumpled the paper in her hands and wondered how much it would cost to cross 20,000 kilometers. Thoughts of the long journey and the difficulties that lay ahead filled her head, and the heaviness in her soul only increased. She felt that this test would not be easy. The girl approached the hotel keeper and said she was only staying for one night, asking for 2 rooms. He looked at her carefully and asked if her company was going to be late, seeing that she had come alone but had asked for more rooms. He looked quite old. She pointed her hand to the side, anxious and absent-minded, as if confirming that he was already there. Her gaze was uncertain, and her movements seemed to lack clarity. She looked around nervously, trying to find something in the room, but her thoughts were still wandering. She looked quite confused. The old man looked around and said absent-mindedly that there was no one behind the girl. He looked a little tired and perhaps not quite understanding the whole situation, but his words were accurate. The girl, hearing this, froze for a moment, feeling the tension growing. The girl looked around anxiously, trying to understand who he was and why no one could see him. She felt her anxiety growing. It seemed that this man was nearby, but his presence was so strange that she could not understand what was happening. The girl looked around with fear, feeling her anxiety growing. She quickly decided that saying she had made a mistake and asking for only 1 room would be the best option. The owner, hearing her words, nodded with a slight smile, accepting her decision and confirmed that he would give her one room without asking any questions. As she walked up the stairs, the innkeeper asked her if she was wearing the academy attire. He remembered seeing it a couple of times as she was one of the chosen ones from their village. He added that they had become priests now, and every time he saw them, he thought how heartless the heavens were. His words were filled with some regret and heavy understanding. The girl walked up the stairs, wondering why she hadn't thought of this before. Questions were spinning in her head, but she couldn't find answers. Why hadn't she noticed these details before? Meanwhile, the guy was following her, looking around carefully as if he was looking for something in this place. Or maybe he was just enjoying the moment. As written in the holy book, Luminos, the creator of this world, created all things and people with infinite wisdom and power. People, realizing the greatness of the Creator, worshipped and served him with all their hearts, striving to follow his path and seek answers to all life's questions in his teachings. He was considered a majestic man, but the devil, full of envy for the greatness of Luminos, could not tolerate the fact that people worshipped the Creator. In his hatred, he decided to commit a terrible act. He led into the human world man-eating demons, creatures whose essence was full of dark forces and destruction. These demons sowed chaos and destruction, tempting people to retreat from the path of light and truth. And then, in response to the evil that the demons were sowing, and in the moments of the greatest despair of mankind, Luminos, in his infinite wisdom and compassion, gave mankind the power of God. He blessed those who, despite fear and doubt, remained faithful to his light, and gave them the power to fight the darkness and atone for their sins. Those who received the power of God became known as the Chosen Ones. Together, they launched a decisive attack on the demon's lair, defeating them and ending a long and destructive war. Their courage and faith brought peace back to the human world, but despite their victory, many expected a repeat. The demons continued to exist, feeding on the evil desires in the hearts of people. Even after the victory of the Chosen Ones, they did not disappear, but hid in the shadows, waiting for the moment to grow in strength again. Their strength grew stronger when people lost faith or gave in to base passions. The darkness in people's hearts became their food. To this day, demons continue to lurk in the darkest corners of the empire, hiding from the eyes of men. They wait for the moment when their power grows and they can emerge from the shadows again. Some of them have a terrible skill in seducing people, penetrating their souls and corrupting their hearts. They know how to play on weaknesses. The man smiled at the girl and said that in that case she should rest and call him if she needed anything. Meanwhile, her invisible friend, as if not noticing everything that was happening, was examining the stands while she continued to communicate with the owner. The girl was a little surprised by his calmness, but decided to leave him alone, the girl thought, peering into the dark corners of the room. Her head was spinning with thoughts about demons hiding among people in human form. How to know who among them is a real person and who is just a monster in disguise? After all, they could be anywhere. Among acquaintances next to her? This question worried her. The girl couldn't help but think that the guy, although he seemed noble, could be hiding his true nature. His unusual powers, which he used to heal her and destroy the snake, made her think, especially after she felt a dim demonic spirit when he killed the creature. The girl felt a growing sense of unease. Even though he had saved her life, the thought that he might be a demon haunted her. She knew that he might try to get to the academy through her. She decided that she had to keep an eye on him, be wary, and not trust him completely until she was sure that his intentions were pure. The girl cannot allow herself to give in to emotions, because it could put the Empire at risk. Every decision she makes must be considered and reasoned, no matter how much affection or gratitude she may feel. She must remember that her duty is to protect the people and the academy. While the girl was lost in thought, the guy turned to her, asking, "Is something wrong?" His voice was soft, but with a hint of concern, noticing how her gaze had become clouded and impenetrable. He continued to watch her, trying to understand what was going on in her thoughts, because she seemed to be lost in her thoughts. He sat on the bed, smiling confidently and warmly. His eyes radiated kindness, and his expression was calm and friendly. He offered, if she had any problems, let him tell her about them. He would be happy to help. There was a sincere willingness to support the girl in his voice. The girl sat across the table from him, her gaze full of surprise. She still couldn't get used to his presence, his confidence that seemed to fill the room. Her thoughts were a little confused because every time she looked at him, a feeling of strange uncertainty did not leave her. The girl thought for a moment, then turned her head in the opposite direction, trying to hide her thoughts. The guy, dumbfounded, watched her action, unable to understand what exactly caused such a reaction. Her behavior left him in thought, but he did not try to impose his presence, only continued to look at her with slight interest. The girl thought about it, her thoughts racing, trying to find a logical explanation for his strange behavior. Everything about him seemed so unusual, almost supernatural. She couldn't ignore her intuition, which told her that he might not be who he claimed to be. "He's definitely a demon," she repeated in her mind. She wasn't going to let him seduce her, despite his attractiveness. His beauty, while captivating, wasn't the most important thing. She sensed the danger hidden within him. With a sense of determination and anger, she watched him from behind, her gaze cold and intense, ready to not be deceived. Suddenly, she heard a scream, sharp and alarming. She immediately stood up without thinking and headed towards the source of the sound. Her face looked quite worried. The guy, noticing her determination, hurried after her, not lagging behind. He knew that he could not leave her alone, especially if there was a threat in the air. She took a cautious step forward, her gaze sliding around every corner, expecting to see something or someone. The hallway was dark, only the dim light from the windows barely illuminating the space. The screams she had heard had died down, but the anxiety did not leave her. A shadow flickered at one end of the hallway, and the girl's heart jumped. The girl noticed a figure in a white cloak with long hair. He was standing in the doorway, but she felt that this was not a random person. Watching him tensely, she felt a strange threat. The guy was also on guard. The girl wondered, who is he? And why is he wearing a Reaper outfit? She stood there in fear. The girl listened carefully to the conversation, noticing the anxiety and fear in the people's voices. They discussed the demon's tracks and mentioned her as an innocent child involved in something dangerous. There was anxiety in their words, and she felt her heart beat faster. Questions and fears multiplied, and she herself could not understand what was happening. The girl quickened her pace as she approached the scene. She heard people asking questions and saw the owner of the inn holding a little girl in his arms, trying to get her to react by begging her to open her eyes. Next to him stood a man in a white outfit, whose eyes seemed empty and cold, making him look like a reaper. The man, still holding the girl in his arms, looked at the stranger with hope. His voice trembled with fear, but the stranger calmly replied that the girl had simply lost consciousness from shock and would soon wake up. He looked confident, although his words calmed her down a little, but did not completely remove the anxiety from her father's heart. A green light came out of the Reaper's hands, gently enveloping the girl. The light was bright, but not blinding, as if it was trying to heal her, to restore her strength. The father, looking at what was happening with hope, quietly thanked his savior, feeling the tension in his chest gradually disappear. But the tension suddenly returned when she felt the boy's breath standing right behind her. He was whispering in her ear. His words were quiet but intense, making her heart beat faster. She felt his presence causing her attention to wander, her mind to become clouded with doubts and worries. The boy's words, spoken quietly and with a certain threat, made the girl freeze. "Pathetic, as always," he said, and these words immediately caused a wave of doubt in her soul. She wondered what could be hidden behind these words. He seemed to know something more about people than just superficial observation. She began to ponder his words, which sounded so calm and confident, as if he knew something about people that was unfamiliar to her. It made her seriously wonder about his true intentions and background. Why did he say that? What was he hiding behind his appearance and behavior? The man, with tears in his eyes and a trembling voice, replied that he could not live without his child. His words were full of despair. He was ready to do anything to save his daughter. The Reaper standing next to him answered him in a calm, almost cold tone that he had removed the demonic spirit and now he had no need to worry. Everything would be fine. The Reaper carefully took the blanket and wrapped it around the girl, who lay unconscious in her father's arms. The man, feeling relieved, thanked him again, ready to repay him for saving his daughter. He asked how he could reward the Reaper for his kindness and help, but he did not answer right away. The Reaper replied that he had simply done what he had to do and did not seek gratitude. The girl, opening her eyes, looked at him attentively, not understanding what was happening. He added that it would be very hard for Sicily if something bad happened to Rua, because their bond was strong and invisible. These words made the girl's father squeeze her tighter. The Reaper added that when he saw the girl, he realized how much time had passed and how quickly everything had changed. But their conversation was interrupted by the observing man, who, unable to bear the silence, asked where the demon was now and whether they were all safe. He, not answering right away, looked around, trying to assess the situation. The Reaper replied that they still could not be sure, as the demon could be hiding right now. He warned that everyone needed to remain alert, especially at times like these when danger could be hidden. The people watched him with concern, knowing that even after the creature had been eliminated, the real threat was not yet gone. People began to panic with anxiety, asking many questions, retelling the situation, and discussing what to do next. Some talked about a possible threat, others tried to calm the others down, but no one knew what to do if the demon was really still around. They were very scared. The Reaper ordered everyone to be quiet, and suddenly a green light with a strange pattern appeared where he stood. He stood motionless, his gaze focused, and the energy emanating from him filled the space around him. People fell silent, watching him, trying to figure out what he was going to do. The pattern of light continued to grow, gradually covering the space and moving towards the people. Tension hung in the air. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. They stood rooted to the spot, not knowing what to expect from this strange light, but feeling its magic penetrate their souls. But is it all good? The girl grimaced in anticipation, feeling the tension build, but suddenly felt an invisible barrier form around her. She saw that the guy standing next to her had created a protective shield that protected them from the wave of light. The shield shimmered with a soft light, as if absorbing all the magical energy emanating from the pattern. His face remained very calm, almost emotionless, as if he had done this before and had seen it hundreds of times. He did not show the slightest worry. His confidence and experience were felt in every movement. It was as if he knew how to deal with any threat without any doubt or fear. The so-called Reaper still stood in the middle of the mysterious pattern, surrounded by green light. People watched him in shock, not understanding what was happening. There was a tense fog in the air, as if reality itself was being distorted by his power. Some began to whisper, but most remained in stunned silence. The Reaper, noticing the unrest among the people, finally spoke. His voice was deep and confident, like his presence. He said that this magic circle was blessed by Luminos, the creator of the world. He explained that those who remained within this circle would be safe, as its power guaranteed protection from anything that might threaten. The man, hearing the thanks and realizing the tension, continued speaking. He added that he would now look around to make sure it was safe and advised everyone to stay inside the circle. After these words, he turned around and, without wasting any time, began to walk, carefully examining every detail. The people anxiously tried to stop the man, asking him to stay with them. They felt that his presence brought some kind of protection and could not understand why he decided to leave, leaving them in such a tense situation. His calm demeanor and confident steps only increased their anxiety. The man, who had been trying to grab the Reaper to keep him from leaving, suddenly lost his balance and began to fall, his steps becoming unsteady. The stairs creaked under his weight, and the sound echoed throughout the room. The people watching froze, and his fall attracted everyone's attention, making them nervous. His face twisted in fear and tension as he felt his body lose its balance. He was already bracing himself for the fall, internally cringing at the thought of the pain that was about to overtake him. But at this moment, perhaps something or someone could change the course of events. Green lines began to swarm around him. The lines of light emanating from the Reaper's palms instantly enveloped the man as he seemed about to fall. His voice was calm but firm as he told the man not to worry, as the magic circle would attack demons that came too close. This assurance somewhat calmed the frightened people. He added that the Great Luminos would protect them if they stayed in the circle, but his expression was too cunning, almost sinister. It made the girl feel uneasy. Was he hiding something? Questions began to swirl restlessly in her head. She couldn't believe that this was really a Reaper. The girl wondered if this circle was really capable of attacking demons. But the Reaper had already climbed the stairs. His steps were confident, and he continued to move forward, leaving her with growing doubts and questions. She did not understand what was happening at all. What would happen next? Despite everything that was happening, Julius remained in the circle, and it seemed that everything was fine with him. The girl couldn't help but think, if he was a demon, shouldn't the magic circle have some effect on him? She felt doubt creeping into her mind, but one thing was clear. She still didn't know the whole truth. The girl wondered if he was not a demon, then why did she sense a demonic spirit earlier? This worry did not give her peace. Perhaps his powers were hidden, or he himself was something more than just a man. Every action and every word he said now seemed ambiguous to her, and all her doubts grew stronger. The guy turned to her, asking if she wanted to go to her room, as she looked very tired. He added that it would be much safer if she stayed with him, letting her know that her worries could be in vain in his presence. His face expressed sincerity and looked very calm. The girl thought about what she needed to know about him from the Reaper, and then decided to ask the boy if he knew what oath she had taken when she entered the academy. It was a big decision, and she wanted to understand how he felt about her commitments and principles before taking the next step. It was very strange. The boy looked at her with surprise, and his gaze was filled with some disappointment. He clearly did not know what she was talking about, and his reaction was mildly expressed confusion. He tried to hide it, but his silence only confirmed that he had no idea about the oath she had mentioned. She removed his hand from her shoulder and, looking straight into his eyes, said firmly, "I am Radia Aster, one of the chosen ones. I will not abandon those who are threatened by demons." Her words were full of confidence and strength, as if she was ready to fight anything to protect people. The fire of determination burned in her eyes, and her heart was filled with a single feeling: duty. As the girl walked down the stairs, the boy told her to protect the people here instead. His voice was calm, but there was an urgency in it. It made the girl think. She paused for a moment, feeling an internal struggle between duty and doubt. The atmosphere was tense. He looked at the girl as if he expected something, but his face remained too calm and indifferent. This made her doubt his intentions even more. There was no excitement or worry in his gaze, only silence, which seemed even more disturbing. His eyes were empty, like a deep ocean. The guy thought about her words, about her being one of the chosen ones. It sounded too naive, and he was sure that she would regret her decision. But there was no condemnation in his eyes, only some kind of silent understanding, as if he already knew that everything would definitely lead to what he expected. The Reaper, holding the lamp in his hands, carefully examined the corridors and rooms. His steps were quiet, almost imperceptible, like a ghost, and the light from the lamp barely touched the walls, leaving shadows that smoothly moved in time with his movements. He carefully examined every detail as if he knew what was hidden around every corner. His steps were quiet, but the wood beneath his feet flexed, making a barely audible creak. The girl approached him, her steps quick and determined, but there was a strange tension in the air, as if every sound was important and could reveal a hidden threat. The Reaper, without turning around, told the girl that she was very brave. She replied that she was simply doing what the chosen one must do. They continued walking down the corridor, their steps echoing in the silence, and the tension in the air grew with each step. The girl did not understand how to ask what she wanted, but she continued to follow the man. They entered the room, and the door creaked slightly as it closed. The man confirmed her words, but added that taking action was not easy. The room was silent, filled with vague expectations, and both felt that they needed to be prepared for whatever might happen. The Reaper stood in the center of the room, his eyes calm, but no less intense. The girl, hesitating a little, decided to ask a question. She asked if he had seen anyone suspicious on the first floor. The man frowned at her as if he didn't quite understand what she was talking about and replied, "What do you mean?" The girl shook her head slightly, refusing to elaborate further. "I'm talking about a very handsome man," she said, considering that if the Reaper hadn't noticed him, he probably wouldn't be able to. The atmosphere in the room was heavy enough that Radia didn't understand what might happen if he saw him. The man continued to look out the window, frowning slightly. His voice became more tense as he said that he saw a demonic spirit. He noted that the spirit lurked in the dark corners, not allowing himself to be fully seen. The girl, feeling a surge of anxiety, also approached the window, trying to see at least a hint of something strange. He placed the lamp next to the window, his gaze focused on the dark void beyond the glass. "This spirit comes from outside," he said. "It would be wonderful if the demon had already left." The girl thought, listening carefully to his words. She felt that this spirit, although dangerous, was still much weaker than the demon she had met before. The Reaper held his palm against the cold glass, his gaze focused as if trying to penetrate the dark shadows of the night. The girl, still not entirely sure of what was happening, asked again if he was truly confident in his abilities. His face remained calm, and he replied that he always tried to do his best. He stared at the window, his gaze focused on the place where his palm touched the cold glass. The same green light began to emanate from his palm again, brighter and more intense than before. The light spread across the glass as if trying to penetrate into the very depths of the night. His movements were confident. The same beautiful pattern began to emerge from under the Reaper's hand again, this time even more complex and mesmerizing. Green lines intertwined and flowed smoothly across the glass, forming geometric shapes that resembled a magical symbol. Each line seemed to have a life of its own, as if the pattern itself was searching for a path. The girl thought about it, trying to comprehend the Reaper's words about the demon's power. It was bothering her. Deciding that now was not the best time for such conversations, she decided that it would be better to ask the Reaper about her invisible friend tomorrow, when everything had calmed down and she could talk to him calmly. The Reaper removed his hand from the window, and an interesting pattern began to form in the air. It was complex, with elegant writing, and a star shape formed in the center. The light coming from the pattern was green and shimmering, creating a sense of magic and power emanating from the Reaper. Placing his hand at the center of the pattern, the Reaper watched calmly as his magic continued to evolve. There was a look of pride in his work, as if he had complete confidence in the power and accuracy of this spell. His face remained calm, and the green light emanating from the pattern filled the room with a mysterious glow. He continued to stand by the window, looking at the pattern that was slowly disappearing into thin air, and then added that the temple had already dispatched its men. These reinforcements would not only be to fight the demons, but also to ensure the safety of the entire area. He was not hasty in his words, as if the entire situation was under his control. The girl quietly thanked God for his help, her words filled with sincere gratitude. The Reaper, without turning around, continued to say that now his task was to protect the people until reinforcements arrived. His voice was even and calm, but there was a sense of strength in it, as if he was ready to protect these people without hesitation, the girl thought, watching the Reaper. Everything looked as if they would finally be safe, and this thought could not but please her. From time to time, her anxiety still returned, but the hope for protection and upcoming help penetrated her heart more and more. For the first time in a long time, she felt calm. The Reaper asked if they should explore the next room. He stood by the door, listening to the silence, and looked like a man accustomed to unknown dangers. His eyes were fixed on the girl, waiting for her answer. There was tension in the air, as if there was a threat lurking around every corner. The girl looked with the same smile, trying to understand which neighboring room they would have to examine. Her gaze was curious, but calm. She was ready to follow the Reaper, but inside she still felt a slight wariness. She looked around and realized that this was the very door, but suddenly the girl was overcome with anxiety, and her gaze changed, becoming frightened and wary. She instinctively stopped, as if she sensed danger coming from the unknown. All her confidence disappeared, and she began to listen to the sounds around her, trying to understand what could have caused this strange wave of anxiety. The girl took another look at the magic circles that surrounded the room and decided to ask the Reaper a question. She asked him what these circles were, trying to understand their meaning. The Reaper answered that they were protective magic circles that prevented the invasion of demons. He added that she would probably study them in more detail in her 3rd year. The girl, having heard the answer, still looked lost. She stood silently, pondering the words of the Reaper. but her thoughts were full of doubts and uncertainty. Everything happening around her seemed too complicated and incomprehensible, and even the magic circles did not help dispel her anxiety. The girl, following the Reaper, decided to ask a question that had long interested her. "Do you by any chance have children?" she asked, trying to catch even the slightest change in his behavior. The Reaper did not answer right away. His steps remained confident and measured, as if he was still thinking about the answer. This question made the man stop and freeze for a moment. He stood there as if trying to figure out what exactly prompted the girl to ask him. The question was indeed unexpected, especially in the context of everything that was happening. His gaze became a little more attentive, and his expression became thoughtful, as if he was thinking about something. He asked her why she was interested in this with caution on his face, his gaze becoming tense, as if he had not expected such a question. He clearly felt wariness, and his expression spoke of an internal struggle. He was trying to understand what this question was hiding and what she expected from him. She explained that the bracelet on his arm was very popular among children, and she noticed that he was wearing it despite the fact that he looked quite old. The bracelet caught her attention, and she couldn't help but wonder why he was wearing it. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were focused, as if she was searching for answers to something important. The man confirmed her words, adding that it was his daughter's favorite bracelet. He looked at the jewelry with sadness in his eyes, as if trying to hold on to the memories of her. The silence in the room became heavy for a moment, and his face seemed to be eclipsed by emotions he did not want to show. He began to talk about her, and the girl learned that her name was Cicely. The man spoke of her with such warmth that each word sounded like a prayer. He said that his daughter was the greatest gift from God, like a light that came into his life. His eyes filled with tenderness and pain when he remembered her, and he told her how long she had been a ray of light. The girl came closer to the man. Her steps were quiet, and she looked at him with curiosity, thinking that the girl's name was truly wonderful. The name Cicely seemed to be filled with light and warmth, reflecting not only divine beauty, but also the depth of feelings that this man had for his daughter. She gathered her courage to finally say something to the Reaper. A determined look appeared in her eyes, although her voice remained calm, but with a slight note of tension. She was not sure of her actions. The girl drew her sword and swung it at the man, saying with cold calm, "It must have been hard to accept the death of your lovely daughter." There was no anger in her voice, but every word sounded like steel, and her gaze was as unmoving as the determination in her actions. It was unexpected for both of them. A fierce battle ensued between them. The girl swung her sword with skill and determination, ringing with each blow against the magical shields created by the man. He used green flashes of magic, reflecting her attacks and trying to keep her at a distance. The room filled with the sounds of battle. The girl flew back, hitting the wall but quickly landed on both feet, holding the sword in her hands. Her breathing was ragged, but she tried not to show weakness. The man, seeing that he had gained an advantage, turned sharply and rushed towards the exit, trying to hide. The girl, clutching the hilt of her sword, rose abruptly and ran after the man. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, and her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She couldn't let him go, knowing that he was hiding the truth. The man turned around, noticing her approach, and quickened his pace, trying to disappear around the corner. But the girl didn't lag behind. The girl, having caught up with the man, blocked his path. With a sword in her hands, she stopped, ready to continue the fight, her gaze full of determination. The man turned around. Their gazes crossed, but neither retreated. She was confident in her victory, because she was not used to giving up. She was amazed at the Reaper's way of winning, running as fast as he could. The man fell onto the stairs with a loud thud, his body rolling down, hitting the steps. The girl stopped, her breathing ragged, her gaze watching him tensely. The sound of his fall echoed down the hallway, attracting the attention of people who began to peer out of their rooms, talking worriedly. People started talking in panic when they heard the noise and saw the man lying at the bottom of the stairs. Some claimed that it was the work of demons, while others tried to understand what had happened. Their anxious voices echoed throughout the house, adding to the atmosphere of fear. The girl standing at the top of the stairs looked down tensely. People slowly began to approach the man lying at the foot of the stairs. Their faces were filled with anxiety and curiosity. Whispers began to develop into discussions. No one could understand what had happened. Some were afraid to come too close. Others, on the contrary, tried to see if he was hurt. The man sat on the floor, his head down, as if trying to come to his senses. People cautiously surrounded him, each expressing their concern. They offered to help. Some offered a hand. Others offered to bring something. In their eyes, there was genuine fear for their savior, whom they considered a hero. The man raised his head angrily, gritting his teeth and cursing, calling everyone around him a hypocrite. His voice was muffled, but filled with such rage that people involuntarily retreated. His gaze darted around the crowd, full of contempt and bitterness, as if he could see the true nature of each person, hidden behind their masks. The people looked at the man with horror and confusion, not believing their ears. Their savior, the one they trusted and placed their hopes in, was cursing them. They froze in place from what was happening. The atmosphere in the room became tense. People did not know how to react, fearing his every move. The sword whistled through the air, heading straight for the man. The entire room froze, watching this moment. The girl's gaze was cold and determined. Every muscle in her body seemed to scream that she would not back down. The man seemed to not believe until the last second that she would dare to do such a thing. The people around just watched, unable to utter a word. The sword pierced the wall next to the man, and his face lit up with a mocking smile. He looked up at the girl as if challenging her resolve. It was a very tense moment for everyone. The Reaper did not look entirely healthy. The girl, standing at the edge of the stairs, raised her hand as if to block the Reaper's path. Her voice cut through the tense silence as she shouted at the people to run immediately, because the Reaper was on the demon's side. Her words shocked the crowd. People looked at her and the man with horror and disbelief. Emotions boiled inside the girl. The people looked at what was happening with horror and bewilderment, as if they could not believe their eyes. Their savior, the one they trusted, suddenly turned out to be something completely different from what he claimed to be. Whispers and muffled cries ran through the crowd, but no one dared to move. However, after they had thought a little about the girl's words and realized the danger, the people, having overcome their shock, began to scatter. Panic gripped the crowd, and the noise of their flight echoed throughout the house. Some grabbed children, others tried to find a way out. Clashes and screams only increased the chaos. They were very scared. The crowd, trying to get out, rushed around the door, holding the handle, pushing it with their whole bodies, but the door did not give in. The sounds of desperate attempts only added to the nervousness. People began to scream. Some tried to barricade the door, hoping that it would be possible to somehow open it, but with each passing moment, the anxiety increased. The girl stood on the stairs, silently watching the panic unfold below. Her eyes were calm, but there was something darker than just watching. She saw people fighting for their safety, their fear growing, and their desperate attempts to get out. But there was no such uneasy feeling in her soul. The girl stood silently, watching the panic among the people, when suddenly she felt a touch on her shoulder. She turned around sharply, her heart pounding, but there was no one in front of her. The feeling of the touch remained, but it was as if something invisible had slipped past, leaving only a cold trace. An anxious fear awoke inside her. Her heart started beating faster when she saw a little girl with fangs and blue hair. She licked her cheek with a smile and said that she smelled delicious. This strange and creepy scene made the girl shudder. She looked around anxiously, not knowing what to expect next, and felt anxiety growing in her chest. The girl turned around in an instant, hearing the boy grab the creature by the scruff of the neck. He held it in his hand, but his face was tense, as if prepared for any threat. The creature did not resist, and its eyes glowed with an ominous light, as if it did not understand the danger. The girl froze, her gaze darting between them. The girl put her tongue away and looked at the boy with devilish purple eyes, but her gaze was too cute not to confuse him. It was as if she was playing with him, expressing interest, but there was something much more sinister hidden in her eyes. The girl felt the tension increase. The man angrily threw the girl to the floor, and she fell with a crash onto the stairs, making painful sounds. Something resembling resentment flashed in her eyes, but she did not try to get up, remaining on the ground. The atmosphere around her became more and more tense, and the girl, watching what was happening, felt her anxiety growing. The girl wiped away her tears with her sleeve, her heart pounding with confusion. She thought that the girl was probably a demon too, but there were too many questions. Why did she look so defenseless? Why did the guy treat her so cruelly? Different thoughts were spinning in her head, but they all remained unclear and confusing. The girl thought in confusion and began to examine her hands, as if trying to find some answers in their movements or signs. Touching the skin, she tried to calm down, but her thoughts became more and more confused. Questions about demons, about the boy, about what was happening around, all mixed up in her head. Her heart was still beating strongly. The girl continued to stand, her gaze fixed on the void, and a multitude of questions raged in her head. Why was everything happening so illogical? Who was she really, and what was her role in this world? Each new discovery gave rise to even more doubts. The questions seemed endless and the answers so unattainable. The boy stood next to her, his face soft and caring as he gently wiped the tears from her cheek. His actions were filled with calm confidence, and despite her inner doubts, she felt kindness. She needed the strength of the man in front of her, his power and experience, to defeat the evil that threatened everything around her. The girl turned sharply, and her heart skipped a beat when the voice sounded. It was deep and low, full of menace, as if it echoed in her ears. It sounded as if the dark world itself was whispering in her ear. Radia Astor felt her body tense, but her gaze was firm. The girl froze, her eyes filled with determination, but her heart was boiling with anger and worry. She couldn't let this creature harm those she was trying to protect. The Reaper, holding the girl by the hair, did not hold back his mocking smile, and his hand with the sword ready to strike made her heart beat faster. The boy and girl stood on the second floor, their eyes fixed on what was happening below. Their hearts were pounding, but they couldn't intervene because they were too far away. The girl clenched her fists, her thoughts full of doubt and fear for the little girl the Reaper was holding. The girl took a deep breath, trying to cope with the growing sense of panic. She knew that now she needed to remain calm and wait for the moment when the situation would become more favorable. She understood that an attack at the moment could only cause harm, and she needed to be ready to act when the chance came. The girl, not hiding her determination, continued to tell the Reaper that her suspicions were correct. The magic circle he used could not be defensive. She pointed out its true purpose, a demonic summoning circle. This explained everything. How demons appeared, how they got into this world, and what destructive forces are with it. The girl continued to insist, with burning anger in her voice, that it was a bloody circle for sacrifice. Her eyes were sparkling with rage, and every word she said sounded like a sentence. The guy standing behind her silently watched everything that was happening, trying to catch her emotions and figure out what was really going on. She continued, saying that the Reaper was trying to summon his victims with blood that was still warm, and then attack the living. This ritual gave him incredible power, and time was running out. They had to act before he could complete what he had planned. The girl's thoughts were confused, but she was confident. He wanted to use many people as puppets, killing them and forcing their twisted souls to serve him. It was a vicious cycle that the Reaper was able to create. Each new sacrifice only strengthened his power and opened the way for more victims. His plan was not only cruel, but also ruthless. The girl stared at the Reaper and decided to press on his weakness, his dead daughter. She knew that this could be the only way to make him stop. The boy watched her courage with admiration, feeling how her determination filled the space. He understood that she had to take risks to achieve her goal. The girl addressed the Reaper, accusing him of using rue to gather the villagers. She claimed that his next step would be to do the same to all who came as sacrifices for his dark purposes. The Reaper listened to her words in silence, his eyes glimmering with an icy light, indicating hidden intentions. The man smiled as he listened to her accusations, his fangs glinting in the dim light. That sinister grin only served to heighten her suspicions and fears. The girl he was holding felt a chill run down her spine. The man seemed to enjoy her fear, and that made his smile even more terrifying. The man, holding the girl by the hair, looked into her eyes and asked if she heard it, and if she felt her father's love. He promised to give her wealth and glory in the afterlife if she willingly gave up her life. His words sounded like an ominous whisper, increasing the atmosphere of horror and hopelessness. The The girl, hearing his words, angrily shouted that she was not finished yet and demanded that he stop. Her voice trembled with rage and fear, but she was not going to give in. The red-haired girl held onto the railing with anxiety. The man only smirked, his fangs flashing again in the dim light, adding even more horror to this gloomy scene. The man, already somewhat tired and indifferent, raised his head and asked how much longer he had to listen to her speech. There was obvious irritation in his voice, as if her words were just a disturbing background for his own thoughts. He still held the poor girl with one hand, who was in enough pain. The girl screamed, asking if he really thought his daughter wanted this, and if he even knew what he had done. Her voice was full of despair and anger, and she hoped that her words could awaken at least a drop of humanity in him. But she also wanted to save the people in this house. She knew that Cicely was a sore spot for the Reaper. She looked at him, loudly declaring that this was not his daughter, but a demon in her form. Her voice was filled with determination and desperation. The atmosphere was growing tense, and every breath was filled with fear. The girl knew that her chances of salvation were diminishing, but her determination remained unwavering. The girl noticed how small, fiery lines began to appear around the Reaper. She understood that there was very little left until victory. Confidence filled the entire room. Her heart was pounding wildly in her chest, but her determination did not leave her. And she knew that she had to act immediately to save herself and, perhaps, others. The man replied with a tired voice that she talked too much for a person who didn't even have children of her own. His words were full of contempt and mockery, and it seemed that he didn't want to waste his time on her anymore. The girl felt her heart squeeze with pain and anger. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. He said that his children were naturally more important than his own life, and made a cut on the girl's neck. His actions were quick and decisive, and the girl felt the blood start to flow down her skin. Her heart began to beat even faster. She was clearly scared, and the blood was boiling inside her, because she did not even imagine the outcome of events. The red-haired girl felt fury when she realized that he had killed the girl. Her eyes lit up with determination, and she knew that she had to act despite the fear and pain. Her thoughts were focused on how to stop the evil she saw before her. She gathered all her strength and courage, preparing for the final decisive step. Lines of fire began to appear around the man, emanating from him. He came closer to the wounded girl, and her heart began to beat even faster. The heat from the fire increased her fear, but she knew that she had to fight until her last breath. Time was slipping away, and her chances of salvation were rapidly fading. The man courageously extended his hand, clenched it, and those same fiery lines began to come out of it. In his other hand, he held a sword, ready for action. His determination was obvious, and the girl understood that her time was running out. She gathered all her strength, preparing for the final, decisive step. Multicolored sparks of fire burst from his hand, each of which danced in the air, creating an amazing spectacle. These sparks seemed to live their own lives, shining brightly and leaving behind glowing traces. The inhabitants could not take their eyes off, fascinated by this unusual and strange phenomenon. It was very dangerous. The red-haired girl watched the events with anger, her blood boiling inside her like a river of fire. Her eyes were blazing with rage, and her hands were clenched into fists, ready for action. She felt the adrenaline rushing through her veins, making her heart beat faster. At this moment, she was ready to do anything to stop this. The man set the girl at his feet on fire and turned to the red-haired girl, asking if she thought she had a chance against him. His voice sounded calm, but in reality, it expressed great anger. He was ready to do anything to win and achieve his goal. Without sparing anyone, he acted too terribly. He turned to her again, saying ironically, "You're just a student. Do you think you stand a chance against a priest?" His words were laced with contempt, but the red-haired girl did not waver. Determination was boiling inside her, and she knew she would not give up without a fight. The atmosphere was getting worse. The man looked like a madman. The girl looked at the man with caution with her blue eyes, her face full of surprise, because demonization was unfolding before her eyes. This sight simultaneously fascinated and frightened her, not allowing her to tear her eyes away. She felt goosebumps running down her spine, and her heart began to beat faster. The guy standing behind her watched everything with disdain. His face remained calm despite the chaos around him. His eyes were cold and indifferent, as if none of this mattered to him. He was like an observer, not involved in the events, but ready to intervene at any moment. The girl was horrified when she realized that this priest had not only come into contact with a demon, but had also become one himself. Her eyes widened in horror, and she involuntarily cried out, unable to contain her emotions. This discovery shook her to the depths of her soul, and she felt a cold fear grip her heart. The man said with disdain, "That's very naive of you. You're trying to judge me in terms of ethics and morality when I sold my soul to resurrect my daughter." His words were full of bitterness and despair, but they also contained an unwavering determination. The red-haired girl felt her heart clench at those words. The man took his sword and swung it, preparing to deliver the killing blow. His face was frozen in a look of cruelty and madness. He knew that this would be the 10th victim, and this knowledge gave him an unnatural determination. Every movement he made radiated power and menace, as if horror itself were embodied in this man. The people watched the whole thing with horror. Their faces were distorted with fear, and their eyes were wide open in horror. They could not believe what they saw before them. Each of them felt a cold fear gripping their hearts, and no one dared to take a step. The sight was so frightening that it seemed as if time had stopped. The red-haired girl was filled with rage, and her eyes were flashing lightning. Clenching her hands into fists, she felt the anger boiling in her veins, ready to burst out. Her anger was so strong that it seemed like it was about to get out of control. Despite this, she maintained her composure and was ready to act at any moment. The girl said angrily, "You don't even deserve to be called a father." Her voice shook with rage and her eyes flashed with anger. She couldn't believe that the man standing in front of her could do such terrible things. Her words were full of contempt and pain, and she knew that she would not back down until she got justice. The girl thought for a moment, then turned to the boy who stood behind her. There was determination in her eyes, and she knew that he would understand it without words. She knew that they had to work together to counter what was happening. Julius was a very strong opponent who could defeat this Reaper. He immediately, hearing her words, leaned closer to her with a smile. His eyes sparkled with interest, and he slightly raised his eyebrows, as if asking something important. He leaned close enough for the girl to hear his quiet but confident voice. Julius was glad that she finally turned to him for help. The girl asked him to lend her his power, promising in return whatever he wanted. The guy, hearing her request, took her hand and said with a smile, "You already know what I want." His words sounded quiet, but there was a hidden strength and confidence in them. The girl felt her heart beat faster. The boy added that from now on, his power belonged to her. All she had to do was fight as she always did. His words sounded confident and encouraging, and the girl felt her resolve strengthen. She knew that she now had support, and this gave her strength for the upcoming battle. The Reaper appeared again, his appearance truly terrifying. He addressed the girl, asking, "Why don't you become my victim too?" His words sounded like a cold challenge, and the girl felt her heart clench in fear. But she knew she couldn't afford to show weakness. The man leapt towards them, his hand outstretched, palm open. Blinding rays of light emanated from his palm, and he clearly intended to defeat her. His face was distorted with malice, and his eyes were blazing with determination. The red-haired girl felt her heart beat faster, but she was not going to back down. She knew she had to fight to the end. This action of the man made the girl very angry. Her face began to express anger, and her blue eyes darkened and began to look not quite kind. She felt how rage filled her, turning her into a determined and dangerous opponent. Radia was ready to defeat the Reaper and protect all the people around her. The battle between them flared up again, and golden lightning began to strike everywhere. The force and fury of the fight could be felt at every step, and the air around them trembled with tension. The lightning brightly illuminated their faces, creating a sight that was hard to tear your eyes away from. This battle was very important for both of them, but only one would win. The Reaper screamed in pain as his body slowly began to disappear before everyone's eyes. His screams echoed throughout the surrounding area as people watched in horror. It felt like the darkness itself was consuming him, leaving only emptiness where he stood. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but it was getting better with each passing second. The man looked at himself with anger and realized a terrible thing. His demonic spirit had completely disappeared. The girl had managed to defeat him. He felt his strength leaving and realized that he had lost. His face was distorted with rage and despair, but he could no longer change anything. He looked stupid and funny in his sadness. An angry but satisfied girl stood before him. He still didn't understand how an ordinary student could break his demonic spirit. His thoughts raced in search of an answer, but the only thing he felt was the bitterness of defeat. She, on the contrary, stood confidently, feeling the taste of victory and realizing that her strength and determination exceeded all expectations. The man thought that he should leave here immediately, because he could be disgraced in front of people. His thoughts were racing, and he felt how fear and shame were beginning to overwhelm him. He knew that his defeat would be a disgrace, and he could not afford to stay here any longer. He began to run, thinking that if he could keep his demonic spirit, he would hold the ceremony in 10 days. His thoughts were full of determination and fear, and he knew that he had little time. The man had to act quickly to avoid shame and regain his strength. Feeling heavy, he ran as fast as he could. The man continued to run towards the exit, realizing that he was not ready to die here. His heart was beating faster and his thoughts were racing, searching for a way out of this situation. He knew that he had to survive and preserve his demonic spirit to have a chance to come back and finish what he started. But suddenly the girl kicked him and he fell. She was confident in her actions, and her determination left no room for doubt. Her eyes were burning with determination, and she knew that she would not stop until she achieved her goal. Radia asked her clearly knew what she wanted. She stood up behind him with her sword in her hands as he lay on the ground. She placed her foot on his body and looked at him with determination. He looked around with irritation, realizing that his defeat was inevitable. The man clearly did not know what to do to carry out his planned plan. She spun the sword in her hands like a fidget spinner, demonstrating her skill and confidence. Each turn of the sword reflected her determination and ability to fight. The man lying on the ground looked at her with irritation, realizing that his defeat was inevitable. The girl plunged the blade into the boards right next to his neck. He looked at the sword in fear, realizing how close he was to death. Her determination and strength filled him with fear, and he realized that he could no longer resist her. Her eyes burned with fury, and in that moment she realized her victory. The girl said mockingly, "You've finally lost your demonic spirit. Do you really think I'll let you escape?" Her words sounded like a cold challenge, and the man felt his hopes of salvation fading. She stood before him, full of determination and strength, ready to see this through to the end. The boy who was watching this was thinking. It seemed to him that he had felt this before. His gaze became thoughtful, and shadows of memories flashed in his eyes. He tried to understand what exactly this event reminded him of, but the thoughts eluded him, leaving only a slight feeling of déjà vu. The girl decided to act angrily and use her magic. Her eyes glowed brightly, and she felt the power filling her body. She knew that this was her only chance to win, and she was ready to use all her power to achieve her goal. Many people began to discuss everything that was happening, but the Reaper was already tied to a small wooden block. The girl had defeated him. Her triumph was obvious, and she stood proudly, realizing her victory. People around exchanged glances and words, trying to understand what had happened, but no one could deny the strength and determination of the girl. The girl added with concern that she had not been able to catch the spirit that was in his daughter's body. "We cannot be sure that we are completely safe." Her voice trembled and her eyes showed concern. The people around her froze, realizing that the threat was not completely gone. The hotel owner approached the girl and told her that there had been rumors about the Reaper 2 years ago, after his daughter's death. His eyes expressed concern and worry, and he hoped that the girl could clarify the situation and help deal with the threat that might still exist. The hotel owner added that he had heard that a Reaper had almost been kicked out of the temple for investigating suspicious topics, but due to the lack of hard evidence, he had only received a warning. The girl was surprised, realizing how serious the situation could be. This situation was too terrible. The girl looked around, looked at her hand, and looked very confused. The owner, noticing her condition, asked if she was okay. His voice was full of concern, and he hoped that she would be able to answer and dispel his worries. but the girl seemed absorbed in her thoughts and did not answer right away. The girl clenched her hand and brought it to her chest, as if she was hiding something. There was anxiety in her soul, and her eyes reflected her inner anxiety. She tried to hide her feelings, but her tense gaze and trembling hands betrayed her true state. But the girl only smiled at the owner, saying that everything was fine. He responded in kind, trying to hide his anxiety. An anxious feeling continued to boil inside her, but she tried not to show it, maintaining calm and confidence on the outside. She knew that it was definitely better for him not to know. The girl held a drink in a wooden cup, steam rising from it. Her soul was still filled with anxiety, but she hid it behind a calm smile. It seemed that the drink warmed her slightly, giving her confidence in this difficult situation. She felt better after everything she had experienced. There were many people sitting in the hall discussing the recent events. The girl sat among them, holding a drink in a wooden cup. Steam slowly rose from the cup, warming it slightly. Near her was her invisible friend, whom only she could see. The Reaper was still tied up. His defeat was discussed by all present. The girl picked up the cup and thought that the drink was very hot. She looked charming, and there was no longer any anger on her face. Calmness and thoughtfulness replaced her previous determination, adding softness and charm to her appearance. At that moment, she looked like an ordinary girl, lost in her thoughts. The girl thought about her words and promises to the guy. She felt insecure and afraid of the unknown. Thoughts swirled in her head, creating a whirlwind of doubts and hopes. She didn't know what would happen next, but she understood that she had to be ready for anything. Her heart beat faster and faster, waiting for what events would follow her words and actions. The man looked at her and made a noise, urging her to say something. The girl looked at him, still holding the hot cup, and realized that he was eager to hear her opinion. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to express her thoughts and hopes for the future. He looked very handsome. The guy looked at the girl with concern and asked if she was going to take back her words. The girl, holding a hot cup in her hands, felt the warmth coming from the drink. She thought about it. Her gaze stopped on the guy. Her face no longer expressed anger, only thoughtfulness and seriousness. She understood that her words mattered. The girl, with alarm in her eyes, showed her hand, as if demonstrating silent evidence of what had happened. She explained that she had not expected such a turn of events. According to her, a curse had been placed on her, and she assumed that its effect would last for about a week. There was a mixture of fear and hopelessness in her voice. The boy, alarmed by her words and the pallor of her face, carefully took her hand in his fingers gently encircling her fragile fingers. He looked at her carefully, looking for any visible signs of a curse, his brows furrowed in worry. His heart sank with sympathy and a desire to help. Silence hung between them. The boy frowned, quietly saying, "I think it's serious." The girl, alarmed by his tone, looked at him questioningly and with slight anxiety, her eyebrows slightly raised, as if she was trying to understand what he meant. She was clearly frightened by the sign that was on her palm. It was bright red. The boy, still holding her hand in his, was looking closely at the small, barely noticeable design on her skin. A small, strange squiggle, more like a calligraphic flourish than anything else. His thumbs were on her fragile fingers, as if afraid to hurt them. He was studying the sign with concentration. There was a subtle but powerful chemistry between them. The guy looked at the girl with such tenderness that she almost physically felt the warmth of his gaze. His gaze kept returning to her palm, as if he was trying to unravel the secret hidden in this small, strange drawing, but at the same time his eyes were filled with deep sympathy and care. The moment stretched out in time, as if the world around them had frozen, leaving only the two of them. Him, her, and the mysterious curse etched on her fragile skin. Time lost its usual flow, leaving only the intimacy of their relationship, the deep understanding that had arisen between them in this tense silence. The girl couldn't understand why the guy looked so worried, as if his pride was hurt. She glanced at him again, but decided to ignore his mood and continued drinking her drink. Her thoughts returned to recent events, making her wonder what could have caused such a reaction in the guy. Finally, she placed the cup on the table, noticing that there was still some drink left at the bottom. Her thoughts wandered in different directions, and she tried to figure out what could have bothered the guy so much. A tense silence hung in the room, but she decided not to pay attention to it and continued her thoughts, lightly touching the cup with her fingertips. They continued to sit. The girl propped her head up with her hand and tried to understand why the guy was taking the situation so seriously. Her thoughts were busy trying to figure out his behavior, but she couldn't find an answer. The tension in the air was growing, but she tried to remain calm despite the inner doubts. The girl, not knowing how else to explain the guy's strange behavior, ran her fingers through his hair and asked if he was a demon. The guy suddenly raised his head and his eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, silence filled the room, and his reaction was so unexpected that the girl felt a chill run down her spine. She waited for his answer. She apologized and explained that she needed to make sure before they continued the conversation. Her voice was full of sincerity, and she hoped that her words would help smooth over the tension. The guy still looked surprised, but gradually his expression softened. He realized that her question was dictated by concern and anxiety. The guy looked at the girl in surprise, taken aback by her question. He tried to understand what could have made her ask such an unexpected question. His thoughts were chaotically rushing about, trying to find the reason for her suspicions. The atmosphere in the room was becoming more and more tense, and the tension was almost palpable. This was very strange from the girl. The boy, with surprise in his eyes, asked why she thought he was a demon. His voice was full of confusion, and he clearly hadn't expected such a question. The girl felt that her words had hurt him, but she knew that she had to explain her suspicions in order to continue the conversation. Every breath was hard for both of them. The girl began to give arguments, explaining that his strength and beauty could not be ordinary. She assumed that it was a demonic spirit mixed with divine power. Her words sounded confident, and she hoped that she could convince him of her rightness. The guy listened attentively, his eyes flickering with interest in the answer. The man calmly closed his eyes, realizing that the girl suspected him, but not understanding why the demonic spirit was mentioned here. He took a deep breath and, opening his eyes, looked at her with interest. He did not understand the logic of Radia Aster, because she was quite amazing. He wanted to know much more. The man smiled and said that it might be because he had fought a very strong demon for 3 days straight before he died. His words sounded unusually light despite the dark content. The girl felt her heart beat faster, realizing the seriousness of his words. The girl, hearing his story, interrupted the guy with a trembling voice. Her heart beat faster, mixing fear and curiosity. She tried to understand the seriousness of his words and understand how such an incredible story could be reality. The room was filled with tension, and every moment seemed like an eternity. The girl couldn't understand his words about him fighting for 3 days before dying. Her thoughts were confused, and she tried to comprehend the seriousness of his story. Questions arose in her head, but she didn't know how to ask them. The atmosphere in the room became more and more tense, and each moment seemed like an eternity. The guy liked Radia's reaction. The guy folded his arms and, with a slight smile, said that he had died more than 100 years ago. He added that other people could not see him. The girl was so shocked that her eyes literally popped out of her head. She could not believe what she had heard, and her thoughts were racing, trying to comprehend the improbability of the situation. It was quite strange to understand. The girl responded in surprise that she thought he might be hiding as a demon, but she was interested in the question of why she was able to see him. Her voice trembled with excitement and curiosity. She looked at him attentively, waiting for an answer. Radia really did not understand this turn of events, and she did not understand the guy's story. He replied that the girl was special. The atmosphere in the room became enchanting. She did not understand what was happening, but she clearly liked it. The feeling of mystery and unusualness of what was happening fascinated her, and she felt her heart beat faster from excitement. The lamps that were burning in the hall seemed harmonious with the situation. The guy looked at the girl calmly and said that he didn't know why she was the only person who could see and touch him. The girl was very surprised by his words and couldn't hide her surprise. The atmosphere in the room remained charming and mysterious. Her heart beat much faster. The guy added that he was extremely lucky to meet the girl. His eyes shone with gratitude and sincerity. The girl felt her heart fill with warmth from his words. The girl tried to comprehend everything in surprise. Her thoughts were spinning, trying to find a logical explanation for what had happened. She looked at the guy again, his calm face, his eyes full of confidence and warmth. It was hard for her to believe in the reality of what was happening, but she felt that this meeting was not accidental.